It was recently announced that Netflix inventory is now accessible in Amazon's DSP, adding to its availability through the Trade Desk, DV360, and Xandr. Joining me to discuss the impact of this on the streaming ad landscape and what it means for advertisers are Ocean Media's VP of Digital Strategy, Katie Harker, and SVP Digital Media and Innovation, Casey Holbrook. So, I guess my first question is why Netflix and why is this notable for brands and advertisers? Casey, what do you think?
Good question. When I'm thinking about when we're selecting publishers for CTV, there are things that I look for. And ultimately, Netflix brings a lot of this to the table. It's access to eyeballs, which comes in the form of scale and like time spent, in addition to incremental reach. How are we finding new people that we aren't finding in current buys that we're doing? I think ad load is also important. What's the percent of share that we're having? And then cost always comes into the mix of this. And ultimately, Netflix solves for a lot of this. It has a lot of uniques across the US. In fact, there's 46 million, and this has been growing. And I think it will continue to grow. And ultimately, 55% of their new subscribers are coming in that ad tier. So it's really starting to make a difference, and people are selecting that ad tier versus buying out the ads. Netflix has a very high viewership, lots of hours, lots of time being spent, and ultimately allows us to ensure or have the possibility of reaching these people on the eyeballs, or reaching their eyeballs. So the other thing is incremental reach, and it's like how incremental is Netflix to our buys? And they came back and kind of said something along the lines of 82% of people on Netflix aren't watching HBO, or 67% aren't watching Disney Plus. Hulu, there's not as much overlap either, around 55%. So it is a lot of incrementality that's coming to this platform as well, which is why it's very helpful for brands and marketers to be considering Netflix. The other thing is around ad load. What percentage of share are you getting? And ultimately, Netflix at this time is pretty low on the ad load standpoint, around 4 to 5 minutes per hour. And there's a lot of limitations that they even do midstream to not ruin the experience. And I think that that's really great and thoughtful of them. I will call out that they don't necessarily win on the cost. They're still very much premium CPMs, but it also should be considered given all the other benefits. So there's lots of good whys to be on Netflix. That makes this type of conversation quite notable.
Katie, what does Netflix availability across major DSP signals about its evolution as an ad platform?
Yeah, I think, some of the biggest for me is really I think how mainstream it's becoming. I don't think it's really the exception anymore. So when it launched, it was November 2022. So we're about 3 years into the game with Netflix. And we're really starting to see that access is broadening. First it was Microsoft, it was the direct buy. And now they're really kind of adopting to the workflow that agencies and brands and media buyers are looking for, which is more of that ease of access, that streamlined buying, the kind of alignment and complement to everything else that brands and agencies are looking for in terms of their publisher stack and their sweet spot there. And I think what it also signals too is just the kind of readiness that they are to I think put a little bit more skin in the game too of, they're going to be here relatively soon in terms of having more advancements in data and measurement and so forth. And I think the biggest is, again, really having more of that broadening access to advertisers, because when it first came to market, it was $65. And there were a few limited ad slots, little viewership in terms of ad-supported tiers. So there's a lot of movement they've made there.
Katie, how should advertisers think about Netflix compared to HBO Max, Peacock, Disney Plus, a lot of those competitors now that they're available on DSPs?
Yeah, and I think some of it too is like we're really starting to see that the playing field is leveling out here. And I think, something that stands out to me is, just kind of the first thought when you have of Netflix of, it's a little bit more consistent viewership. You go in, you get to the home screen, you know what to expect. It's curated to you. You have, on-demand content from documentaries to drama and, so forth. They have such an advancement, I think, in original titles. And, what I think Netflix really kind of wins out in is some of that content at scale. And I think, some of the publishers that they're, really competing against for some of that viewership and that attention span, I think about Disney, I think about Peacock, and a lot of theirs is really leaning into some of the live sports game. We're seeing the same thing come up, from a prime standpoint. And I think Netflix has really done a really great job from kind of having that consistent viewership and the kind of consistent expectation in terms of content, whether original or not. And, I think that they're really starting to advance too in some of that live sports and really bring in some of those kind of peak cultural moments. We've got the UFC fights. You've got Christmas Day games. We're starting to see, a lot of that kind of come to parity as well. But I think one of the biggest where they really stand out too from that competitor standpoint is a lot more kind of that consistency in that content. And I think that that's why, when they first launched in the game, they were able to be exclusive. And so, when we think about where Netflix sits, it's the exact same kind of viewpoint we go through with every single publisher of, what is the role that each of them are really playing in the buy? What's the role that they play in terms of how the audience is going to see the brand, experience the brand, and so forth. And so it really kind of just differs from publisher to publisher.
I think now that Netflix is part of the DSP, there's a lot more pressure on Netflix to prove themselves. They're going to have to justify how they can charge the CPMs that they are, but not bring the same amount of measurement and targeting as what we can do with others. And so there's going to be some pressure that ultimately gets felt from that standpoint, which I think is good. I do think that the differentiation is going to come into the types of content. Who's going to win in content, brand safety versus that flexibility and scale. So I think there's going to be some pressure that Netflix feels.
Katie, what role should Netflix play in omni-channel media planning now that it's easier to buy alongside retail, social, and CTV?
Yeah, I think that their role in omni-channel still kind of fits where it was as a direct partnership access level, and that it's a premium touch point. It is really kind of that first experience within the awareness play. I think that it will always be such a premium environment for brands and advertisers to kind of play in. I think, what will be interesting is really thinking about, as we look at each of these publishers and the stacks and the different technologies and platforms and all the other things that come with, omni-channel media planning, is really, again, kind of going back to what's the role, what's the seasonality, things like that I think allows for it to kind of offset maybe peak cultural moments, access to live sports. It really, I think, helps kind of with some of that evergreen premium nature. And then I think the other role that it plays is, they're just now coming into the programmatic, I guess not just now, they've kind of been here, but the access is broadening. And I think it'll be exciting to watch the developments they make that other publishers and, other tech stacks have been making around data and identity and measurement. And I think that's kind of the next evolution that's in front of them. And, I think that's where this really starts to bolster between a much broader kind of omni-channel strategy and how we have all of those kind of golden threads through top funnel all the way down, and really think through kind of the role that it initiates in the overall user journey.
Yeah, and for me, it kind of comes down to Netflix is no longer sitting outside. Now, as they've been part of the DSP through many different platforms, it's allowed us to think of them less about how to buy them, because we got to go buy them outside of a DSP. It's more now, how does it fit, or where does it fit within our strategies of storytelling, of retail, of whatever it might look like. So it really changes just the way that we're thinking about them versus, and how we execute with them versus how we go about doing it.
With Netflix's measurement still developing, I guess, should brands lean in early or wait for more robust reporting? Katie, what do you think?
Great question. You're exactly correct. There are limitations. It's it's not unique to any DSP. It is, you're going to come across it no matter the access point. I think for any brand, the early adoption will always be a win. You kind of work through what is the overall expectation, what is the anticipated reach, some of the stronger engagement that we can kind of anticipate. But I think one of the biggest is benchmarking. And everyone's going to grade their own homework and kind of think about measurement in a little bit of a different fashion. But I think it allows advertisers to really kind of dip their toes in, and really kind of start to see, what does this look like? How do we think about the role that Netflix is playing based on the early signals of interest and intent that we get from Netflix campaigns? But I think my POV is let's jump in a little bit early, and as the measurement evolves, I think we have a pretty strong hold on kind of how to navigate some of those impending changes.
Yeah, there's not always workarounds. But us, Ocean Media, having worked through some of these new publisher phases, like where Netflix is at before, there are ways in which we have found that we can structure a test to be able to compare performance to other publishers. And so we are working with the client now to help us understand the performance of Netflix versus other publishers that we're running through the DSP, trying to build out that case study and bring these insights to other clients in the meantime. And so we're hopeful that we're going to be able to figure some of this stuff out to guide us a bit more. It's not perfect, but it does help us in the meantime.
So I guess my final question is, what should brands and agencies be asking their partners today about Netflix buys through their DSPs?
Good question. Some of these things that I'd be thinking about is, how does Netflix now fit within our buys, our DSP workflow? What types of challenges or guardrails exist around identity, data usage, and measurement? Those are the big kind of holdups right now, but making sure that you're staying on top of that. And lastly, one of the big values that we see with Netflix being a part of the DSP is reach and frequency, and how is that going to be managed across the platforms?
Yeah, and I think a couple other questions for me, I would say, is data strategy, and Casey kind of alluded to that, where on the identity side, but there's so much advancement, whether it's retail, whether it's tech stacks, whether it's publishers, in terms of really kind of finding some of that precision. Now that CTV has almost moved into this blurred performance game. So I think that's an area that, and you think about too, the power of Netflix and all the visibility that they have into households and users and profiles, that I think that will be another one that I would continue to push on. And then the other is creative. We like to think about CTV in terms of the standard video spot that you would see, but also what is there any flexibility and kind of opportunity for more creative, out of the box, unique kind of attention grabbing placements that Netflix could bring?
Yeah, and I would just follow up and say this is where Netflix has chosen to start. It's going to get better. They're going to have to move more into identity mapping, more into targeting, more into measurement and having solutions. But this is just where they're at now, and so it's important that we're staying on top of these changing aspects of how Netflix has entered in, so that we are at the cusp of when they do start to open things up, that we can be first to market, that we can be thinking about how this fits into our advertising plans and how they perform. They're going to feel the pressure coming soon. It's just a matter of time.
Katie, Casey, thank you for your time, and thank you all for watching. To learn more about advertising trends, brand strategy, and media investment, visit oceanmediainc.com for all the latest news and insights.